Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we'll be beginning the first half of the 24th juz. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فمن أظلم ممن كذب على الله وكذب بالصدق إذ جاءه أليس في جهنم مثوى للكافرين والذي جاء بالصدق وصدق به أولئك هم المتقون لهم ما يشاءون عند ربهم ذلك جزاء المحسنين ليكفر الله عنهم أسوأ الذي عملوا ويجزيهم أجرهم بأحسن الذي كانوا يعملون أليس الله بكاف عبده ويخوفونك بالذين من دونه ومن يضلل الله فما له من هاد ومن يهد الله فما له من مضل أليس الله بعزيز ذي انتقام ولئن سألتهم من خلق السماوات والأرض ليقولن الله قل أفرأيتم ما تدعون من دون الله إن أرادني الله بضر هل هن كاشفات ضره أو أرادني برحمة هل هن ممسكات رحمته قل حسبي الله عليه يتوكل المتوكلون قل يا قوم اعملوا على مكانتكم إني عامل فسوف تعلمون من يأتيه عذاب يخزيه ويحل عليه عذاب مقيم حتى إنا أنزلنا عليك كتابا للناس بالحق فمن اهتدى فلنفسه ومن ضل فإنما يضل عليها وما أنت عليهم بوكيل الله يتوفى الأنفس حين موتها والتي لم تمت في منامها فيمسك التي قضى عليها الموت ويرسل الأخرى إلى أجل مسمى إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يتفكرون أم اتخذوا من دون الله شفعاء قل أولو كانوا لا يملكون شيئا ولا يعقلون قل لله الشفاعة جميعا له ملك السماوات والأرض ثم إليه ترجعون وإذا ذكر الله وحده اشمأزت قلوب الذين لا يؤمنون بالآخرة وإذا ذكر الذين من دونه إذا هم يستبشرون قل اللهم فاطر السماوات والأرض عالم الغيب والشهادة أنت تحكم بين عبادك فيما كانوا فيه يختلفون ولو أن للذين ظلموا ما في الأرض جميعا ومثله معه لافتدوا به من سوء العذاب يوم القيامة وبدا لهم من الله ما لم يكونوا يحتسبون وبدا لهم سيئات ما كسبوا وحاق بهم ما كانوا به يستهزئون فإذا مس الإنسان ضر دعانا ثم إذا خولناه نعمة منا قال إنما أوتيته على علم بل هي فتنة ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون قد قالها الذين من قبلهم فما أغنى عنهم ما كانوا يكسبون فأصابهم سيئات ما كسبوا والذين ظلموا من هؤلاء سيصيبهم سيئات ما كسبوا وما هم بمعجزين أولم يعلموا أن الله يبسط الرزق لمن يشاء ويقدر إن في ذلك لآيات لقوم يؤمنون قل يا عبادي الذين أسرفوا على أنفسهم لا تقنطوا من رحمة الله إن الله يغفر الذنوب جميعا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم وأنيبوا إلى ربكم وأسلموا له من قبل أن يأتيكم العذاب ثم لا تنصرون واتبعوا أحسن ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم من قبل أن يأتيكم العذاب بغتة وأنتم لا تشعرون أن تقول نفس يا حسرة على ما فرطت في جنب الله وإن كنت لمن الساخرين أو تقول لو أن الله هداني لكنت من المتقين أو تقول حين ترى العذاب لو أن لي كرة فأكون من المحسنين بلى قد جاءتك آياتي فكذبت بها واستكبرت وكنت من الكافرين ويوم القيامة ترى الذين كذبوا على الله وجوههم مسودة أليس في جهنم مثوى للمتكبرين وينجي الله الذين اتقوا بمفازتهم لا يمسهم السوء ولا هم يحزنون الله خالق كل شيء وهو على كل شيء وكيل له مقاليد السماوات والأرض والذين كفروا بآيات الله أولئك هم الخاسرون قل أفغير الله تأمروني أعبد أيها الجاهلون ولقد أوحي إليك وإلى الذين من قبلك لئن أشركت ليحبطن عملك ولتكونن من الخاسرين بل الله فاعبد وكن من الشاكرين وما قدر الله حق قدره والأرض جميعا قبضته يوم القيامة والسماوات مطويات بيمينه سبحانه وتعالى عما يشركون ونفخ في الصور فصعق من في السماوات ومن في الأرض إلا من شاء الله ثم نفخ فيه أخرى فإذا هم قيام ينظرون وأشرقت الأرض بنور ربها ووضع الكتاب وجيء بالنبيين والشهداء وقضي بينهم بالحق وهم لا يظلمون ووفيت كل نفس ما عملت وهو أعلم بما يفعلون وسيق الذين كفروا إلى جهنم زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها فتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها ألم يأتكم رسل منكم يتلون عليكم آيات ربكم وينذرونكم لقاء يومكم هذا قالوا بلى ولكن حقت كلمة العذاب على الكافرين قيل ادخلوا أبواب جهنم خالدين فيها فبئس مثوى المتكبرين وسيق الذين اتقوا ربهم إلى الجنة زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها وفتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها سلام عليكم طبتم فادخلوها خالدين وقالوا الحمد لله الذي صدقنا وعده وأورثنا الأرض نتبوأ من الجنة حيث نشاء فنعم أجر العاملين وترى الملائكة حافين من حول العرش يسبحون بحمد ربهم وقضي بينهم بالحق وقيل الحمد لله رب العالمين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم حميم تنزيل الكتاب من الله العزيز العليم غافر الذنب وقابل التوب شديد العقاب ذي الطول لا إله إلا هو إليه المصير المصير. ما يجادل في آيات الله إلا الذين كفروا فلا يغررك تقلبهم في البلاد. كذبت قبلهم قوم نوح والأحزاب من بعدهم وهمت كل أمة برسولهم ليأخذوه وجادلوا بالباطل ليدحدوا به الحق فأخذتهم فكيف كان عقاب. وكذلك حقت كلمة ربك على الذين كفروا أنهم أصحاب النار. الذين يحملون العرش ومن حوله يسبحون بحمد ربهم ويؤمنون به ويستغفرون للذين آمنوا ربنا وسعت كل شيء رحمة وعلما فاغفر للذين تابوا واتبعوا سبيلك وقهم عذاب الجحيم. ربنا وأدخلهم جنات عدن التي وعدتهم ومن صلح من آبائهم وأزواجهم وذرياتهم إنك أنت العزيز الحكيم. وقهم السيئات ومن تق السيئات يومئذ فقد رحمته وذلك هو الفوز العظيم. إن الذين كفروا ينادون لمقت الله أكبر من مقتكم أنفسكم إذ تدعون إلى الإيمان فتكفرون. قالوا ربنا أمتنا اثنتين وأحييتنا اثنتين فاعترفنا بذنوبنا فهل إلى خروج من سبيل. ذلكم بأنه إذا دعي الله وحده كفرتم وإن يشرك به تؤمنوا فالحكم لله العلي الكبير. هو الذي يريكم آياته وينزل لكم من السماء رزقا وما يتذكر إلا من ينيب فدعوا الله مخلصين له الدين ولو كره الكافرون. رفيع الدرجات ذو العرش يلقي الروح من أمره على من يشاء من عباده لينذر يوم التلاق يوم هم بارزون لا يخفى على الله منهم شيء. لمن الملك اليوم لله الواحد القهار. اليوم تجزى كل نفس بما كسبت لا ظلم اليوم إن الله سريع الحساب. وأنذرهم يوم الآزفة إذ القلوب لدى الحناجر كاظمين ما للظالمين من حميم ولا شفيع يطاع يعلم خائنة الأعين وما تخفي الصدور والله يقضي بالحق والذين يدعون من دونه لا يقضون بشيء إن الله هو السميع البصير. أولم يسيروا في الأرض فينظروا كيف كان عاقبة الذين كانوا من قبلهم كانوا هم أشد منهم قوة وآثارا في الأرض فأخذهم الله بذنوبهم وما كان لهم من الله من واق. ذلك بأنهم كانت تأتيهم رسلهم بالبينات فكفروا فأخذهم الله إنه قوي شديد العقاب. ولقد أرسلنا موسى بآياتنا وسلطان مبين إلى فرعون وهامان وقارون فقالوا ساحر كذاب فلما جاءهم بالحق من عندنا قالوا اقتلوا أبناء الذين آمنوا معه واستحيوا نساءهم وما كيد الكافرين إلا في ضلال. وقال فرعون ذروني يقتل موسى وليدع ربه إني أخاف أن يبدل دينكم أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد. وقال موسى إني عذت بربي وربكم من كل متكبر لا يؤمن بيوم الحساب. وقال رجل مؤمن من آل فرعون يكتم إيمانه أتقتلون رجلا أن يقول ربي الله وقد جاء جاءكم بالبينات من ربكم وإن يك كاذبا فعليه كذبه وإن يك صادقا يصبكم بعض الذي يعدكم إن الله لا يهدي من هو مسرف كذاب يا قوم لكم الملك اليوم ظاهرين في الأرض فمن ينصرنا من بأس الله إن جاءنا قال فرعون ما أريكم إلا ما أرى وما أهديكم إلا سبيل الرشاد وقال الذي آمن يا قوم إني أخاف عليكم مثل يوم الأحزاب مثل دأب قوم نوح وعاد وثمود والذين من بعدهم وما الله يريد ظلما للعباد ويا قوم إني أخاف عليكم يوم التناد يوم تولون مدبرين ما لكم من الله من عاص ومن يضلل الله فما له من هاد ولقد جاءكم يوسف من قبل بالبينات فما زلتم في شك مما جاءكم به حتى إذا هلك قلتم لن يبعث الله من بعده رسولا كذلك يضل الله من هو مسرف مرتاب الذين يجادلون في آيات الله بغير سلطان أتاهم كبر مقتا عند الله وعند الذين آمنوا كذلك يطبع الله على كل قلب متكبر جبار وقال فرعون يا هامان ابن لي صرحا لعلي أبلغ أسباب السماوات فأطلع إلى إله موسى وإني لأظنه كاذبا كذلك زين لفرعون سوء عمله وصد عن السبيل وما كيد فرعون إلا في تباب وقال الذي آمن يا قوم اتبعون أهدكم سبيل الرشاد يا قوم إنما هذه الحياة الدنيا متاع وإن الآخرة هي دار القرار من عمل سيئة فلا يجزى إلا مثلها ومن عمل صالحا من ذكر أو أنثى وهو مؤمن فأولئك يدخلون الجنة يرزقون فيها بغير حساب صدق الله العظيم بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. So alhamdulillah, we just finished the recitation of the first half of the 24th juz. And there's only a few more nights until potentially the end of Ramadan. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be amongst the people who witness the entirety of the month and whose acts are accepted in this month and whose selves and families are saved from the fire. Allahumma ameen. The surah that we began the recitation with was continuing from the 23rd juz, which is Surah Az-Zumar. And Surah Az-Zumar translated can translate into either the groups, right, groups of people, or throngs, just meaning large masses of people. And what the surah and the ayah that we'll talk about are the different types of people who go into the fire and the different types of people who enter into Jannah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وسيق الذين كفروا إلى جهنم زمرا حتى إذا جاءوها فتحت أبوابها وقال لهم خزنتها. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that the people who disbelieved, they will be gathered in groups, right? Zumar. They'll be gathered in groups, in successive groups, meaning very different. There are different levels. We know from the hadith and we know from our deen that there are 7 different gates of Jahannam. So different types of people that will go based on the intensity of, the punishment that they're destined for. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be protected from being amongst these people. And that they will go and be driven to Jahannam in successive groups. And that when they arrive there, the gates to Jahannam will be opened. And that the people, the keepers of Jahannam, they will say, did not the messengers come to you from amongst yourselves? Right? Not even strangers, but people that were already part of your communities. And did you not get the warning? Right? What drove you to such disbelief that the people who aren't even asking anything in return except that you fear God and that you do good things and that you stay away from bad things, that you hated that message so much that you turned away from it, so this will be your fate. Right? And the disbelievers, they will cry. Right? وَيُنذِرُونَكُمْ لِقَاءَ يَوْمِكُمْ هَذَا قَالُوا بَلَى. The same thing. They will say, indeed they came. Yes, indeed they came, but the decree for them being in Jahannam, it's already too late for them. Right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He continues in other in the next ayah or in a few ayahs after that, كَيْ يَدْخُلُوا بَابَ جَهَنَّمَ خَالِدِينَ فِيهَا فَبِئْسَ مَثْوَى الْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا رَبَّهُمْ إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ زُمَرًا. And then He begins to talk about the groups of people that will enter Jannah. And when you look at the word siq, it means to throw forcefully. And when you look at the translation for, you don't get this in the translation, but when you see what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, that there will be people who will be thrown into Jahannam because they are resisting. So it makes sense, right? Nobody is going to willfully walk into the fire. And so they are going to be thrown into it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually very interestingly uses the same word for Jannah. And that asks the question, why would people need to be thrown into Jannah? Why would they not willfully walk? And one of the commentaries on this verse is that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا رَبَّهُمْ, that the people who were mindful of Allah, the people that were mindful of their Lord, that they will be told to enter into paradise. And the commentary says that some of them will be resistant. And it goes on to explain that there are going to be people who are destined and who are given the glad tidings that, qalu salama, right? That they will be told peace and enter into Jannah. Every worry that you ever could have had no longer exists. And the rest of eternity is simply happiness for you. But that they will notice that some of the people that they grew up with, some of the people that they loved, some of the people that they were close with, some of the people that they benefited from, some of their teachers, they won't see them around. And they will ask, what about so-and-so? What about that person who used to call me to good, right? Who used to tell me to do good things? Where is he? And they will refuse because they now have been told the glad tidings, right, of them being given the good news. They will refuse to enter until the people that they ask to come into Jannah are also dragged out of Jahannam and brought into Jannah with them because of how beloved they were to them. And so our teachers say that if you ever are given, inshallah, we're all given that glad news, but if we ever enter into Jannah and you don't see your family and you don't see your teachers, or you don't see, hopefully that I'm somebody that you've benefited from, that you ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to not allow you to go in except that you bring the people with you that were beloved to you. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be amongst the people that get our book in our right hand and that we enter into Jannah without any hisab or any bad account. Allahumma ameen. And so one of the things that we also learn from this surah is Zumar, meaning groups. And as we talked about, Jahannam has 7 gates into it, but Jannah, by the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has 8. Meaning there are more gates open to Jannah than Jahannam. And that is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He looks for every opportunity. It doesn't matter if you spent a lifetime in disobedience, but if you've turned to Him with sincerity in time when you had time and not when you were given the news of death, that He says no mistake is too big for forgiveness. And rather the opposite, that somebody who comes with sincerity, that their entire past is forgiven. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always looking for excuses to forgive His servants because He doesn't benefit from their punishment. And so neither do we benefit, and neither does He benefit from our worship. Rather, it's for our own selves. And it's because we do it because it brings us nearer to Him and it's commanded of us. And so this begs the question that, what about people who are varying in their different levels of intensity and commitment to the deen? And one of the things that our teachers tell us is that if somebody is, doing something differently than you, and as long as you know it's not something that's forbidden by the religion, right? It's not something that is bad or that will lead people to doing things that lead them to going astray, that you don't demean people, right? You don't make fun of people for following, for doing some things and not doing other things. You don't make fun of people for doing things that are differently than you, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that the purity of their heart may lead to one of their deeds being accepted and none of yours being accepted. Or that, the one thing that they're able to stick to that keeps them close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if they disobey and everything else, is the only reason that at the end of their life that they turn back to Him. And so when you see people who, for example, they especially during this month, it happens a lot, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide them, but people who fast but they don't pray, or they don't pray the rest of the year, right? We don't tell them, what's the point of your fasting if you're not praying, because whatever good you can do is good for your own soul. And we'll talk about a story briefly, but similarly, right, people who wear hijab but they don't do the rest of the deen properly, or people who don't wear hijab and they still have an inclination to pray, right? These are all still things that they're trying and they're making an effort, and it's our responsibility to encourage and to support people to be able to do better. And we never ever ever demean them, unless that we take them away from the little that they were already doing and now become accountable for them going away from the deen. And so there's a story of somebody who, there was a caravan, right, that was looting other people, and that there was one righteous person who got robbed, and he's watching this caravan rob his community, and he sees one person staying away from food, and like he's not eating with them. And he asks this person, why aren't you eating, right? If you're robbing us, you might as well eat our food too. And the man looks to him and he says that I'm fasting. Right? And the righteous man, he says, how can you say something like that? Like, how can you be fasting in the midst of stealing and plundering and absolutely demolishing our community? How do you think something like this is going to be accepted? And we don't know what will be accepted. And what he says is that I might be doing this, making these mistakes, but the door that I'm keeping open for myself is the door of fasting, Bab al-Siyam. And that over time, after years pass, the man who was robbed, the righteous man, he is in the haram and he sees the same person who robbed him making tawaf. But this time he's different. And that he looks more composed and more put together, and he's more mindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that he looks the part too. And he goes to him and he asks him that, what happened? Right? Just some time ago, you were a robber, right? You were taking away people's wealth and their belongings unjustly. And now you're standing here in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you're being mindful of Him and you're praying. And he says, I entered through that door, i.e. the door that I had left open. Meaning, in other words, if the fast was the only thing that was keeping him close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that might have been the only reason that years down the road, he ended up changing his ways. And so we never know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to guide, and nor do we know the status that they will have. And this is the beauty in our deen, that there is no mistake that you can make that is beyond the mercy and the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that there are multiple doors to Jannah. And so if somebody is good at something, let them be good at it. Right? Don't take them away from it. And people struggle, and so don't give up on them, because you don't know where they may end up. Right? And when we look at the beautiful, beautiful example of our Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, where there are always so many gems that move you to tears at times, where Anas radiallahu anh, this was reported by him, this was somebody who grew up in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ. He spent 10 years serving him, meaning he saw him every single day from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, and that he was the person the Prophet ﷺ told to do things. And Anas radiallahu anh, he says that I served the Prophet ﷺ for 10 years, and in those 10 years, not even once did he turn his head away from me, or did he even say uff to me. He never looked down at me even once. And this is the Prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then the most beautiful part of this narration is something that I struggle with and many of us struggle with, that he's specific. And he says that the Prophet ﷺ never once said to me about something that I didn't do, something that I neglected, that he never asked me, why didn't you do it? Right? Or for anything that I did, why did you do it? And this is such a beautiful narration, because oftentimes when people are forgetful and when they're not doing things, we begin to admonish them, right? We begin to tell them that, why didn't you do this? Or if they're not doing something, or if they did something they weren't supposed to do, why did you do this? But the example of the Prophet ﷺ was he always corrected, and he corrected gently. That he did so out of love, because the door to someone's heart is out of love and it's not out of harshness. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be a people of love, and to allow him to be people that are constantly mindful of him and that bring people to him and that never turn people away from him. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Jazakumullah khairan everyone for joining. Inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow for the first half of the 25th juz. Assalamu alaikum.